Welcome to the She Leads podcast, a space that empowers women like you to build success in a way that feels authentic, energizing, and aligned with who you really are. In a world that tries to convince us that success means hustling harder and following everyone else's rules, we're here to rewrite the script. This is about success that feels nourishing, not depleting. Success that brings the fulfillment, impact, and recognition you deserve, whilst ultimately giving you the financial power to create the future you want and inspire meaningful change in the world around you. Make sure to hit the follow button so that you never miss an episode, and come and say hello on Instagram. You can find us at she_leads.academy. Let's dive in. Hello ladies, and welcome to a brand new episode of the She Leads show. Today, I want to dive into the unspoken pressure of being likable as a woman, either in business or in leadership, in the corporate world, in coaching maybe. Now, when I think across my career, I think I've had a belief for a very long time. And that belief was my success hinged less on what I knew and more on how much people liked me. And it was almost like that unspoken test. Do people find me agreeable? Am I someone people want to say yes to? And this has been, in the corporate space and also in business. So if we sort of skip back to the beginning of my career, when I was a law graduate, I was interviewing for training contracts, and I went for so many interviews. And I realized this isn't just about my grades or my work ethic or my potential. It was really also about personality fit. Could they see me as somebody integrating with the office, with the team? And it felt like I wasn't just auditioning to be a lawyer. I was also auditioning to be likable. And later, as I've built my career as a coach, the stakes have shifted, but the expectation is still there. So coaching depends on trust. And I found that I internalized this idea that trust could only be built if clients liked me. If I polished my words, if I made sure I was approachable and relatable, not just insightful. It wasn't just about my expertise. I had to also be liked. So there was this very much unspoken rule. People aren't going to buy from me. They're not going to buy my wisdom unless they also like the person delivering it. And then it's kind of played out as well across other things. So when it's come to marketing myself, so, my book, also my business, the advice I kept hearing was build a brand that people like, build your personal brand, make people, relate to you, make yourself likable, show your personality. And so really success became tied not really to the depth of my ideas, but to whether I could attract a wide enough audience who liked me enough to click, to follow, to like my Instagram posts, and to ultimately buy from me. So on the surface, this all makes sense. Like likability, it does open doors, it builds rapport, it makes people say yes to you. But the more I've leaned into this, the more I've begun to notice the shadow side of likability, which is the consistent self-monitoring, maybe the shrinking of your edges, this sort of careful calculation of how much of myself was too much, maybe. So in this pursuit of likability, I realized it's not a strategy here, it's actually a trap. And there's almost this, I think of it as like a hidden tax of likability. And when we think about success here, I think one of the things that comes up, especially in the corporate world, that one of the barriers to a woman's potential and success is this glass ceiling. So we refer to this term glass ceiling. It's that invisible barrier that prevents women from rising into their highest levels of leadership, of success. So even when they've got the qualifications, the skills, the ambition, there's this barrier. And in the corporate world, it can often show up as women being unrepresented in senior executive roles and C-suite roles. For women in business and entrepreneurship, the glass ceiling is a little bit different, but it is still there. So it might be difficulty in accessing capital, difficulty getting into networks, or being presented with opportunities in comparison to our male counterparts. We only have to look at the studies They consistently show that women-led businesses receive less investment and funding and are often taken less seriously in industries that are still dominated by men. Now, I want you to consider that what if the greatest barrier to a woman's leadership isn't actually the glass ceiling at all, but it's this invisible social contract, the contract that says women have to be liked. It's not just about how successful you can be, but also how gracefully and pleasantly we must climb in getting to where we want to go. Now, unlike men whose competencies are often enough to earn authority, I think there's a bigger expectation on women to layer charm and likability on top of achievement. And we have to be not only competent, but we also have to be palatable. And I think the message it sends is success alone isn't sufficient unless it's wrapped in likability. And the danger here is that every time a woman reshapes herself to be more likable, more acceptable, her authenticity, her impact, and ultimately her freedom, they are being quietly diminished. So who benefits from this? Who benefits from this demand for women to be likable? Really, if we think about it, it's about power. Historically, women were told their role was to be accommodating, pleasant, selfless, the agreeable, person in the background to men's authority. And likability almost became this form of control. Women could enter into professional spaces, but only if they played by the rules of charm. And today, that legacy, it plays out. It's very much subtler, but it's still there. And amongst many of the women I work with, whether that's business owners, coaches, women in leadership roles, likability often shapes not just how they show up, but also the opportunities that they're offered. So one of my clients who was a small business owner, not in the coaching space, she admitted that she was avoiding raising her prices because she didn't want to seem too greedy or risk clients thinking poorly of her. And she wasn't just calculating revenue here. She was also calculating her approval. I had another instance where a coach was building her practice and told me that she spent so long editing her social media posts because she wanted to get the balance right. She wanted to basically be likable. She wanted to, put across value and be liked by her audience, but also she wanted to make sales, but she didn't want to be so direct that she'd be called pushy because, again, she wanted to be likable. Another example, an entrepreneur I worked with confessed that networking events left her feeling exhausted. And this wasn't because she lacked confidence, but because she felt like she had to really perform, an endlessly likable version of herself. She had to be approachable, bubbly, light, outgoing. So who benefits from this pressure to be likable? Well, I think it's really the people and the systems around women. So companies benefit when women hold back strong opinions to keep the peace. Leaders benefit when women cushion their feedback so no one feels uncomfortable. Clients benefit even when women, coaches, for example, or women business owners bend over backwards to make sure our clients feel good, even if it means avoiding hard truths. So it's really about other people getting comfort and harmony, whilst women often are the ones carrying the cost. And I think this is why it's so dangerous to treat likability as, it's a harmless thing. Everyone wants to be liked. Likability can often be weaponized as a woman's measure of her worth. We're often punished for being bold or direct or too ambitious, whilst compliance is often rewarded. People-pleasing is often rewarded. Self-silencing is often subtly rewarded. So it looks like a compliment if somebody says to you, "Oh, you're just so approachable. You're just so, friendly all the time." But beneath it lies this hidden tax on our authenticity, on also our authority, and ultimately also our success. Now, I think one of the most exhausting realities for women in leadership or in business is this double bind. So it's this almost impossible choice between being seen as somebody that's competent or being seen as likable. And the very traits that signal strength in men, so things like assertiveness, directness, decisiveness, these things can often be read as aggression or coldness in women. So what earns men respect can actually cost women her credibility. And I think I've seen this play out so many times in the corporate world, in business. So a lot of the work that I do now is around feminine leadership. So working with either corporate women or business owners or coaches to really help them take them to that next level of success, and really identifying sort of what are the barriers there from them getting to that next level. And one entrepreneur in particular that I worked with, she was hesitating to enforce her payment terms with a client who had repeatedly delayed paying invoices. And something that came up was that she was worried that being firm would make her seem difficult. She was scared that, it feels really uncomfortable for me to be asking for the money that she was rightly owed. And when we dug into this, what it ultimately came down to was fearing being disliked if she was to ask for what she was owed. Now, when I started to think about likability, I think, it is helpful. Like, who doesn't want to be seen as approachable or likable or easy to work with or warm or relatable? But I think beneath the surface, that demand to be likable carries a very heavy cost. And this cost doesn't just impact the women, but also the organizations they work for, the businesses they lead. So if you think about in business, in organizations, when women are busy monitoring how their words or their expressions or how their emails are going to be received, they have less space for risk-taking or for creative thought. I spoke about it earlier. There's also this authenticity tax. Likability often forces women to dilute their voices to survive. And then we can also consider that the performance of constant pleasantness or being liked is exhausting. We're constantly performing. It's exhausting. So, I've worked with women who have, let's say they've been to a networking event and they felt like they've had to perform as their best selves in order to be liked. And they've come away from that feeling absolutely exhausted. And it wasn't necessarily that they wouldn't have enjoyed going to that event, but it's the pressure that they're putting on themselves to be, as likable as possible. Now, I think one of the difficulties with this likability piece is we're trying to strike a balance between being nice, which ultimately everybody wants to be nice. Everyone wants to be liked by others, but we also want to be respected, and then we also want to be authentic. So we kind of feel like we have this choice: be nice, be respected, or be tough enough to prove that we belong. And if we think about nice I think really becomes a trap. Niceness is often confused with likability, but it's rarely about genuine kindness. Instead, it becomes this performance. So smoothing our edges, softening our opinions, maybe swallowing our frustration to keep others comfortable. And yeah, sure, maybe this does win temporary approval, but ultimately it erodes your authority and it leaves women carrying the emotional labor of keeping the peace. If we then think about respect by contrast comes not from people pleasing, but from clarity, from consistency, from impact. Leaders earn respect when they deliver results, when they hold firm boundaries, when they can communicate with integrity. Now, the challenge is that women who seek respect without performing niceness are often mischaracterized as a bitch or as cold or as difficult. So I always think here of Miranda Priestly in The Devil Wears Prada. And then we've got authenticity, which really is this middle ground. And this, I think, is where our real opportunity lies, being authentic. Authentic leaders are the ones who don't contort themselves to be liked, nor do they harden themselves to be taken seriously. So these are the ones that are leading with their natural strengths. They speak their truth without apology. So it's really about unapologetic leadership. They're able to show empathy, but without self-erasure. So authenticity, it's not about being the most agreeable, but nor does it mean being the most abrasive. It means being the truest version of you, who's grounded in your own values, who's very clear in your vision, and is also unapologetic in speaking your truth, in being present. And I think it's important to dismantle the myth that the only way for women to command authority is to swing between these extremes. So the endlessly nice caretaker or the bitch stereotype. Leadership doesn't require either of these masks. What it requires is women being trusted for their competence, women that are respected for the decisions that they make, women that are valued for their full, authentic selves. And the balance here is not about choosing between nice or being respected, or between being likable and being feared. It's about actually rejecting this framework entirely and actually redefining leadership as the freedom to be your authentic self, to be both human and also be powerful. Now, I think one of the biggest costs to likability is that it can really shrink a woman's earning power. So if we think about business owners, likability can show up in the way that they price themselves, or the way that they are able to sell themselves. So I think many women that I've worked with undercharge for their services, or they really hesitate to raise their prices, even though they know what they offer is very valuable. What they're really worried about is that the clients will see them as greedy or maybe not worth it. And again, it comes back to likability. So they may actually sweeten proposals with discounts. They may throw in lots of additional extras, create additional payment terms because they don't want to be seen as being difficult. And on a surface, this can feel like, just good relationship building. But what it translates into is often revenue quietly slipping away. Over time, these choices can erode profitability, which can then limit the ability of a business owner to reinvest into their business or to scale. If we think about the corporate women, the same dynamic can play out with salaries and promotions. So there's lots of research to show that women are less likely to negotiate their starting pay or to push for raises. And it's not because they lack ambition, it's because they've been conditioned to fear that backlash. And again, it comes back to likability. A man, on the other hand, who asks for more is seen as confident. A woman, on the other hand, if she asks for a pay rise, can risk being branded as maybe demanding or, again, unlikable. Even performance reviews can carry this bias. Women are praised for teamwork and helpfulness, whilst men are rewarded for financial results. So this result is a persistent gap in pay and recognition and advancements. And these financial costs compound over time. So, for business owners, if they're consistently undervaluing their services, it's going to keep them operating small, going to stall their growth. For the corporate woman, if they are avoiding negotiation on pay or promotion, it can mean hundreds of thousands lost over a career. So in both of these cases, then, likability acts as this invisible ceiling. I think something that I've come to realise is that money and likability are often framed as opposites for women. So men can demand payment and still be respected, where women, there's this sort of hidden, subtle message that says, you just got to be grateful for the opportunity. And I think until we dismantle this bias, women will continue to bear the financial burden of being liked. Now, when I think deeper about this likability issue, the most basic level, wanting to be liked, is human. From an evolutionary standpoint, belonging to the group was survival. Being rejected, it could mean isolation, vulnerability, maybe even danger, death. And that wiring hasn't left us. So this is why, let's say somebody looks at you in a bit of a dismissive way in a meeting, or maybe you get a critical comment on your social media. Why it stings so deeply? It's because our brains interpret as more than just disapproval. It's actually reading those things as threats. And this is why likability, it's not inherently bad. It's not a weakness. It plays a real role in both leadership and business. So whether that's with clients, colleagues, our audiences, they often respond more readily when they feel that sense of warmth and connection. So relationships really matter, and likability really helps to build those relationships. So likability, it's something that's hardwired in us. It's something that can be very useful. So likability itself isn't the problem. I think the real issue is when it becomes the entire measure of our worth, when approval dictates not only how we show up, but whether we speak up at all. And I think that's when likability, it stops being this tool and actually stops being more of a cage. So it's not about eliminating the desire to be liked. And I don't think we could if we even tried. What there needs to be is this balance to recognize that being liked is useful, but being respected, being trusted, being authentic, they're also essential. And we don't have to put this immense pressure on ourselves to be liked. Now, I do also want to touch upon the trap of playing small to stay relatable, because when I think about likability, what really comes up for me as well is relatability. So I equate likability with being relatable, and this has really shaped how I've shared my achievements. And I think for a long time, I've noticed I've played down my strengths. I've kept myself playing small. And I'm not playing small in what I've accomplished. I've accomplished a lot, but it's been how I've allowed myself to share my accomplishments. And I think going back even from a very young age, whenever I've been congratulated for something or praised for something that I've actually worked really hard for, my instinctive response is to deflect. Oh, it was nothing. Oh, I just got lucky. Or, oh, it wasn't me. It was my team. And I thought I was being humble, but if I'm being honest, I think it was fear. A fear that owning my success too boldly would make other people feel uncomfortable, and they may see me as arrogant or unrelatable or ultimately unlikable. So I actually remember I just finished my first year in business, and I'd made over 6 figures in that first year. And it was something that I was really celebrating with myself and, my husband, who was back then my boyfriend. And I remember around that time going to a networking event. I was living in London, and I remember chatting with somebody, and instead of talking about this big milestone I've just hit and saying, I've grown my business, I was really playing things down. I was saying, I'm just figuring it out. I'm just kind of winging it, just hoping for the best, and we'll just see what happens. So instead of standing firmly in my strengths, in my expertise, in my accomplishments, I was really pointing out where things had been messy, where I'd stumbled, where I wasn't quite there yet. And it was if I believed that the only way people would connect with me is if I made myself smaller, if I was more modest, ultimately if I was more likable. And again, looking back, I can see now what was happening. It wasn't humility. It was self-protection. It was my way of saying, don't worry, I'm not a threat. You can like me because I won't take up too much space. And likability became this filter through which I decided how much of myself I was going to allow myself to reveal. But the cost of this was real, because I think downplaying my achievements, it ultimately made it harder for others to see my value. And by softening my story, I made myself less visible, less memorable, less powerful. And what I thought was likability was, in fact, a very quiet form of self-sabotage. And the irony is, people weren't connecting with me more because I played small. They were actually connecting with me less. And relatability built on self-depreciation, it doesn't necessarily inspire trust. It actually just reinforces the very invisibility I was trying to overcome. Now, if I really think about it, this desire to be liked, I don't think it's the enemy. It's human, it's natural, it's deeply wired into us. Connection matters. There is absolutely nothing wrong with enjoying approval or with, positive relationships. The problem is not the desire to be liked itself. It's the pressure that we attach on being liked. It's the pressure to always be agreeable, the pressure to soften our voices, the pressure to downplay our wins so we don't appear arrogant, the pressure to perform relatably so others feel comfortable. It's this constant self-monitoring. That's, I think, what's really holding us back, not just the simple wish to be liked. And when likability becomes an expectation we place on ourselves, it turns heavy. It's going to shape the way we show up. It's going to force us to measure every word and decision against the imagined reactions of others. And that pressure ultimately comes at a cost. It's going to drain our energy. If we think about when we're under pressure, how exhausting it feels, it also blunts our authenticity. It makes success feel conditional. So instead of leading, we're performing. Instead of, creating authentically and boldly, we're constantly second-guessing ourselves. Instead of really owning our fullest, most authentic selves, we present only the parts of ourselves that we think will be approved. So releasing this pressure then, it doesn't mean rejecting likability. It means holding it lightly. It means allowing yourself to be liked without making it the condition of speaking your truth, of sharing your wins, of showing up for your whole self. So in practice, what does this look like? Well, it's noticing the pressure. Where do you catch yourself shrinking or softening or editing yourself for approval? That awareness is always going to be the first release. And then it's separating preference from truth, asking yourself, am I doing this to connect, or am I doing this because I feel I must? And then we can redefine the standard. So instead of chasing that constant approval, measure yourself by your authenticity, by your clarity, by your impact. And then let go of that weight. Likability, yes, it can be a bonus, but it's not your foundation. Respect, trust, authenticity, these are much, much stronger grounds. Now again, that desire to be liked, it will always be there. It doesn't need to be erased. But the pressure, that's something we can release. It's not that wish for connection that keeps us small. It's the weight of expectation we put on ourselves that does. And when we let go of that weight, we're not just going to feel lighter, we're going to lead more boldly, we're going to create something even bigger, and we're going to succeed on our own terms. Now, before I go, I want to remind you of something important. Insight is powerful, but it's not enough on its own. Transformation doesn't happen from just listening to this. It happens when we actually reflect and integrate what we've learned. So to do that, I've created a follow-up exercise for you. You can access that by going to she-leads.co/podcast. That's she-leads.co/podcast. I will leave that link as well in the show notes. You can download the exercise to accompany this episode. And I hope this all resonated with you today. And I very much look forward to catching up with you on the next episode. Bye, ladies. If today's episode lit something up in you and you are ready to build a coaching business that not only changes lives but creates the income and freedom you deserve, then right now you can request a free trial of our She Leads Academy coach training. To get your free trial, just head over to Instagram and visit us at she_leads.academy. You will find the link to the free trial in our bio. I cannot wait to see what's possible for you.